Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, and welcome to the Digital Leader Show, where each week we discuss key issues and news at the intersection of business, technology, and the humanities in hopes of making you a better digital leader. This week, we're discussing MSPs and IT, how the generative AI trend will affect IT companies, plus other headlines for digital leaders from the world of enterprise technology. We're live each Wednesday at noon Eastern, 9 Pacific on YouTube, LinkedIn, and Twitter. The audio recording is available on major podcast platforms. And don't forget to check out DEInetwork.com for coaching, industry briefings, and peer-to-peer research groups. I'm Dan Goodstein. I head up Digital Enterprise Institute, as well as our sister organization, IRPA AI. We're a professional association and peer-to-peer research network providing education, networking, and advice to over 130,000 members globally, all around automation, enterprise AI, and digital transformation. My co-host is Carlos Alvarenga. He's a researcher and author, educator at the University of Maryland in Georgetown, former advisor from EY and Accenture, and the author of his new book, The Rules of Persuasion. Carlos, good afternoon.
Yeah, good afternoon. Nice to see you again.
It was good having you as our guest last week instead of as our co-host, talking about the book and some of the things going on. I got some really good feedback. You know, we talk a lot about the tech side of the business of tech. Last week we kind of talked about the leadership side of things,
Right.
and how important this is to really anybody, right, within an organization, certainly a big organization.
Right. Like we talked about last week, right? Most of our jobs depend on persuading people to do one thing or another, right? At some point, and so it's interesting to just to dive into the mechanisms of how that works and trying to explain to people that these are rules that kind of govern these kinds of interactions. So a fun conversation, Dan. But back to normal programming this week.
Yeah, I'm excited for our guest. We'll have a guest in a few minutes that we'll introduce, Dave Sobel. He's actually a professional podcaster, so he's very comfortable doing these types of sessions. He does this every day, but he has a background in MSPs and has worked for various different IT providers. And so I really wanted to get with all the hype around ChatGPT. I know we've all seen so much about it. It's kind of overload, but not as much has been talked about how this will affect the IT providers, the people that do this for a living. And so he's got some really great perspectives on that. But before we jump in, let's just do headlines, Carlos. I mean, again, every day you're kind of thrown all of these
Right.
headlines. And it's funny is when we first started the show, it was kind of like a bunch of different topics. Now it's all the same topic. It's another use case, another company coming out with their version of, either their own version of generative AI or an app using generative AI.
Well, and also we're clearly in that hype of the hype cycle, right? Yesterday I was reading about how Palantir stock kind of, I think, was up by 20 or 30% because they announced a product that they didn't describe, but claimed that it never has so much customer interest as they've had for this thing that's coming. And so I think the CEO said, this is sort of going to be the greatest thing ever, right? So we're in that mode where just saying I've got something that like ChatGPT coming, right, will make people go ahead and go crazy about the possibility of what it's going to do. We were chatting for the show about the article as well that Wendy's is trying in one of its corporate stores, right, to train. They're training a drive-through, I guess you'd call it associate, right, virtual associate or AI associate. And I thought that was an interesting article and just talking through what a complex job. We might think of it as a simple job, but there are no simple jobs. And this is right, just getting the machine to handle orders was already a complex sort of programming challenge. So it remains to be in the headlines, right? Of course, then there's always other headlines. We've got the case in New York. I read today Tucker Carlson coming back after his dismissal from Fox on Twitter, of all places. So that'll be interesting as well.
I promise not to talk about Elon Musk or Twitter today, but you ruined it. Now
I
talk
did.
about him.
Now we can move on.
No, but you're right. The Wendy's story is interesting. I think we talked a while back, more within the context of the labor force and the workforce and what it's going to look like in the next, few years. And I mentioned McDonald's has been testing some of this, technology out since 2021 to, I think, not great feedback. But I've also seen some other technology, and I'm not sure if it's the one being used at Wendy's or any of these others, that's actually, in my estimation, better than most human interactions at a drive-through are now. So, I think we're getting really close. And what's interesting about the Wendy's example, at least according to Wendy's, they're not doing it just to, like a lot of companies are, to save money and replace workers amid kind of labor shortages. They say their primary goal is to eliminate miscommunication, cut down on mistakes, and reduce wait times. And that 80% of their customers prefer to take orders that way. I'm surprised at the 80% number, but I'm not surprised that they're trying to find multiple reasons to implement this technology other than just the workforce thing.
Well, this goes back to something we've talked about before, and I always say it's an underreported perspective, which is Silicon Valley's war on labor, right? That this is another example of the continuing march of technology sort of eroding human work in a variety of different forms. And this to me looks like I don't think this is far off, right? And I would imagine they're going to work this one out, and we'll be ordering from machines pretty soon.
Yeah, I think you're right. And, the other one, which is interesting, related to that workforce, you keep seeing headlines about companies, pushing back on the remote work thing. Right. But then, then you see the numbers and, the numbers just don't match up with that. There's this report out of the Wall Street Journal this week or last week where they basically say that the number of people that are, coming back to the workforce, at least the physical office is what I mean, is just down. It's just going down. So 42% of companies are requiring full-time office work versus 49% last quarter. And they're saying 30% of American companies are embracing a hybrid work model, a structured hybrid work model, compared to 20% a few months back.
And it seems to be that there is this tension, right, between more and more companies. And I forgot there was one CEO saying that, listen, this will hurt your career. Well, let's just be honest about it, right? If you don't come back, you're quote unquote off the sort of fast track within the firm. But there just is, I guess, a segment of the population that's willing to say, not that I don't care, but I'm willing to bear that risk / cost, right? Because they just don't want to go back to the 5-day-a-week thing.
Yeah. And then and then there's this game of Chat GPT AI whack-a-mole going on where companies are trying to figure out how to stop the bad side of this happening, right? So I saw this, Spotify found thousands.
Yeah,
I mean, that's a crazy number. Thousands of AI generated songs, mostly through an app called Boomi. Which apparently makes up 14% of the world's recorded music. And now, thanks to Universal and a couple other publishers that brought this to their attention as they put it in the announcement, that this is just taking off.
Well, the other thing that's sort of along that line, we're talking about that ChatGPT. There was an article, I think this morning, about a research project that was done looking at papers that are published in science and in medicine. And the remarkable statistic was that 1/3 of neuroscience papers, I think it was about a quarter of all medical papers, are either fake, right, or plagiarized. And that's now, right, Dan? That's through paper mills and through human creation. If you can imagine the tide of fake science, right, or plagiarized science, whatever research that's going to come if ChatGPT and these kinds of engines continue to work, right? It make the job of being a researcher is about to get, in some ways, easier, but in some ways, a lot more difficult. And I think about people who are in marketing, right? People I know who are marketing people and PR people, they spend their time looking at things that are in the company name and the company story, and how is our message going out into the marketplace? If all of a sudden you're bombarded with sort of fake stories about your brand, about your company, right, this whack-a-mole phenomenon is only going to get worse. You're going to be chasing fake stories and fake events, right, on a full-time sort of basis. So, So,
with all the talk, like I said, with all the talk about how this disrupts everything. I thought, being so much of our audience is enterprise technology companies, I wanted to kind of talk about it from that perspective. So this is a good time to invite our guest, Dave Sobel. Dave is the host of the Business of Tech podcast and MSP Radio. He's also regarded as a leading expert in the delivery of tech services, with experience in both tech and business, which is kind of the intersection of my world as well. And so, Dave, thanks so much for joining us.
Dan, Carlos, thanks for having me.
So give us the broad brushstrokes. How do you, when you look at the news every day and you see all these headlines bombarding you, from your lens as somebody who works with and advises these tech companies, these MSPs, what's going through your mind?
Isn't it great? So the funny thing about this is that we're generally in the business of delivering solutions to customers, right? And the more complex and nuanced the problem, the better the rates and better outcomes, and the more options we've got to work with customers. This is fantastic, but it's backed up with actual adoption data. The reason we're talking about generative AI as much as we are is because ChatGPT is essentially the most successful commercial product launch of all time, right? They outpace social media apps. They're outpacing previous consumer launches across the board. They got to 1 million users faster than anybody else, and they're moving up the scale faster. But more importantly, we're also seeing continued use within commercial spaces. These users are not just trying it out, they are then using it on an ongoing basis. There are still lots to work out in terms of the business model for OpenAI, but what they've done is managed to put their product into a lot of people's hands very, very quickly and keep it there.
Yeah.
Well, there aren't too many other alternatives, right, Dave? That's the question right now. That sort of seems to be that is the only kind of game in town, or at least for the mainstream kind of user. How soon do you think did you see ChatGPT sort of alternative 2, alternative 3?
Well, so I could counter that by saying, look, we're literally broadcasting at exactly the same time Google I/O is going on. So I am confident that they are announcing upgrades to Bard at exactly this moment, right? So I don't know, right now is probably the next one. You've got Microsoft with their flavor of it, and we're starting to see various flavors come out beyond that. I'm going to actually reference one of the reasons that I'm kind of as excited as I am about this is because of that coming complexity. I'm going to reference the guys over at the Tech Me Ride Home, Brian McCullough and Chris Messina, have this working idea of these models as the same way as grapes in winemaking, right? That they're different varietals, and the different capabilities of them will be expressed in the way they get moved through the process. The same way that you'll use, a particular grape in order to create a white wine or to create a red wine, or all the various subtleties to them. These models will produce different outcomes and products based on their characteristics. I love that thinking. And then I immediately extend it and go, what's a great business that's incredibly well paid and specialized is sommeliers. Those experts in wine that work with chefs and work with consumers to make sure that they've matched a particular wine to a particular, food or pairing or whatever it is. That's a very specialized, unique case, and it exactly fits what IT services companies do. They're matching technologies and platforms to customers' needs.
The challenge, I think, and I agree with you, Dave, but I think the challenge is there's so many companies out there that still specialize in the, I don't want to say it in a derogatory way, the grunt work of technology, right? I mean, even a lot of the companies on our network who, I won't mention any names, but, who market themselves as digital and transformation centric, they're still doing mostly body shop deals, outsourced people, butts in seats, kind of FTE models. And I think I saw a quote from you a stat from you recently that half of the code that's going on to GitHub right now is coming from Copilot, right? So if you have that, and you have even small shops, individuals that are maybe the sommeliers of the future of technology, though, how does that translate into cannibalization versus revenue for some of these bigger firms?
Well, so there's kind of two things going on there, right? The first is I like to talk about the sort of the quality of the revenue that you're looking at. I don't want to be disparaging of people that are doing that kind of work. I have this good, better, best model of analyzing it, and I look and say, like, look, that's all good work, right? But you live within the SG&A expense lines of your customers. Everybody needs that stuff, right? They need computers, they need connectivity, they need rent, they need, paper, pens. Like, people pay for that stuff. It's good revenue. I just like being higher value. I want to be living up in cost of goods sold, which is, where I'm managing the actual expense of delivering that solution. That's a much better place to be. But the best line is to be attached to customers' top line revenue. That's by far the best. Every customer is going to spend $1 to get $1.25. Just happens, right? And you're in the best position when you're doing that. Now, it also is coupled with the other phenomenon that those of us in tech always do, which is that we think everything moves incredibly fast. And it just doesn't. I actually was literally for my show was just talking with a professor at MIT who studies supply chain and AI impacts. And he was walking through the historical parallels of conversions. And I hadn't even known that the conversion for phones to go from manual people moving those plugs in boxes, that conversion from that to fully digital took 70 years.
My God, it's amazing.
70 years, right? We're all saying, oh, it's going to exactly happen. That seems like exactly a space that would have happened incredibly quickly, right? But it took 70 years. Now, we're all in the business of, everything is faster. Everything is hockey stick. Everything is moved faster. Okay, what do you want to do? You want to move that? You want to go 10 times faster? 7 years. like we're still moving so much slower than everybody thinks. And I look at this and say, isn't that great, right? That means we can actually do the analysis. We can move at the proper customer speed, and then we can take advantage of it.
Yeah, and then the other consideration too is what does happen to the workforce. I've been fighting people defending automation and AI for years and years and years, as people were worried about the whole taking jobs thing. And now we're in a place where, they can't hire people, quickly enough. Right. And so, Danny's sitting here talk about the Wendy's example that, she's from Ohio. They have a huge, massive workforce shortage there. So, there, maybe it's a little bit more forgiving than other places. But the reality is this is going to have an effect on the workforce. IBM's CEO was quoted recently saying they think there's a 30% efficiency improvement in their back office as a result of this. Well, that's code for we don't need those people. No.
Maybe, right? Maybe. I mean, first off, they're gonna look at that and they're gonna say, how can we make our people better? I think there's a whole bunch of instances where literally humans are going to push back. I mean, again, let's look at planes, right? Planes right now are autonomous drones. All the modern, the 787, the A380, they don't need people. Now, are any of you going to get on a plane that doesn't have a pilot? I mean, are you? If you got on that plane and there were no people in the cockpit, would you stay?
Right.
I think everybody here is going, no, thank you. And I think, but I also, to pull from pop culture, right? I'm a lot less worried about the Terminator and Skynet in AI than I am thinking about what the Elysium. You remember the scene with Matt Damon where he can't get any help and he sits down in front of a robot bureaucrat? That world none of us want to live in, and by the way, these companies don't want to deliver customer service that literally drives people away. Do you mind giving your order to a machine? Not so much, right? I think I tend to favor the touch pad displays in a lot of fast food restaurants because I know I can get my information in more accurately. But what I also know? That then a human's going to deliver it to me and double check everything. Microsoft has this right with the branding. When they call it Copilot, that's exactly right. It's augmenting, not replacing.
Yeah, but I think we have to be careful with just the top level number, right? Because when we talk about jobs, I think there is a shift going on, and it's been going on from the outsourcing days, that the total number of jobs is the same, may even grow, but the quality of the job, right, is completely different. If you look at the top 5 worst jobs in America, what's number one? It's retail, right? Working as a customer service rep at a fast food restaurant, at a store, is the most consistently, by the way, right? The worst job you can have.
No,
And
I think
that's
it's gotten worse. Yeah,
those
it's only
jobs
gotten
are
worse.
growing, right? That's the labor shortage. So what's growing, what people need, are the jobs that are the worst jobs. There's no shortage of people for jobs that are really good. And I think that the distinction that's made sometimes between, and I think it's true, that we're shifting from the old model of sort of labor and management to this labor, talent, and management, right? Is really something that isn't as well documented. There will be talent that builds these systems, and that's going to be a wonderful thing. But for the average worker, the world's going to get worse.
Okay, so maybe, right? You say like that, but there are huge swaths where we have gaps of talent, right? We can, in tech, it's in cybersecurity, but there are trade spaces that have incredible problems. Can you find roofers? Can you find electricians? Like, step into those trade spaces and know that we've got incredible gaps, and we're still running it.
Right? ChatGPT isn't going to come put in a roof, right? That's an education system problem we have in this country, because we don't value historically, right, that kind of work and that kind of education system we do in other countries, right? I think the AI evolution is going to create more plumbers.
You're right at a high level that I don't think societally we necessarily do that. But then you actually get into the pay of some of those people. Those are $150,000 a year jobs, roofing. Like that, I mean, that's not bad, right? Like that's a pretty.
It's because of the shortage, right? The
and
reason.
thus we value it because we don't have enough of it. And so I could make a pretty good argument for saying, like, look, if we do actually value it, we pay because we know we need it, and there aren't enough of that. I'm 100% with you, by the way. I think we can expand apprenticeships, tradecraft, like I think, and in our space in particular, in tech. I'd love us to start seeing 12-month, 18-month programs in cybersecurity that are pumping out people, because we clearly need them, and I think we could expand that to a bunch of different trades. I think there's opportunity there, right? I also think that you could lean into it as providers and say, we're going to actually start building our own pipe of people, because if we're at that level of shortage and we want to supply that stuff to the customer, well, we got to build it. So I look at all of this and say, like, there's opportunity for us here to be better. I don't disagree with you. I just say, I'm not sure I didn't say we devalue it.
No, what I was saying is, I didn't say we don't value the work. I don't think we value the educational system that creates those people, right? There has been for a long time this movement in this country to push everyone to college, the 4-year degree.
Yep.
And I think that's part of the problem. And in other countries, to be a technical worker, right, a skilled technical worker is and to be educated in that system is a valuable, respected thing. I think in this country we've had a little bit over the last few decades, right, this sort of push that, a trade school is somehow not as good as a college degree, when, to your point, there are a lot more people making a lot more money doing, right, what would consider sort of manual labor, right, or technical labor, than there are people with college degrees who are working those jobs that people don't really like very much.
Right. And circling this back to providers, by the way, every time I find an imbalance like this, I'll sort of smile and go, okay, providers that talk to me all the time saying, I don't have enough people, I don't have enough hire, I can't find these people. So lean into this, right? You can lean in and partner with your local, a local community college with a local accreditation. Like, you can lean into that and help build those apprenticeship programs and build your own pipe, right? And start bringing your own people in that you've trained, that you've gotten involved in the education system, and get a competitive advantage and supply out those solutions and those people out to customers. And to Dan's point, like, there's still a plenty good business in body shopping. I'm not going to diss it. And I'm going to say you can also then use those people and move up the chain into linking it to business outcomes and do really well. It's a great business.
Yeah. And I think that's right. I think that, when technology like this happens, it's an oversimplified thing to say, hey, it's going to take jobs, right? It's more about, are you willing to retrain those people to get them to do the better quality job in opposed to the job that they're doing? I mean, you look at numbers, in the white collar space, Wall Street Journal says, that according to a recent research, we spend the equivalent of 2 days a week in meetings and responding to emails, right? So now that's 2 days of efficiency. By the way, I think that's a conservative number.
Right.
I don't think they interviewed anybody that I speak to on a regular basis. So, if you're spending half of your work week, even if it's a 40-hour work week, if you're spending half of that work week doing that, and then you have a co-pilot, right, that can do those things for you, then what could you be doing with that time? I think right now, the average person doesn't know. And they're afraid of that, right? It's a typical defensive tech thing where it's like, I don't know what my job's going to look like, so I'm going to drag my feet as long as I can.
But there's some new data out even showing accelerations in call centers, right? So they actually put generative AI to work with call center employees. And what they actually found was that you can take a 2-month tenured call center person and you can accelerate them to be able to act like a 6-month tenured call center person. Now, there's a diminishing return to that. The more experience that someone gets, the less the generative AI is going to do to help them do that. But again, you can take those 2-month level experience people, make them more like 6-month people, and accelerate your onboarding or accelerate your capabilities. And that's where I'm looking, saying like it's finding those opportunities to pair the technology in the right place with the right people to help accelerate your customers. That makes me excited about the opportunity, saying, this is what we do. This is what technology companies do, is find those use cases within our customers' businesses and help them do better.
So the companies, Dave, that you're speaking to, the MSPs, are they getting this? Because I feel like I actually I don't think that Carlos knows. I started as an MSP. I was in the MSP business, and I remember, and then I sold to MSPs, and I remember even the technology guys being resistant to technology, right? I remember some of the first, AI-ish chatbots where we would say, hey, this can help your level 1 ticket management, create a faster resolution for clients. Obviously labor cost and resolve seasonality issue, all that. And they were so resistant again. They thought that our differentiators are our personal touch. So, and I've seen some numbers that MSPs have, lost a lot of money in the last 3, 6, 9 months. I'm wondering if they're adapting. Are the ones you're speaking to adapting at all?
Well, so it's interesting because you just referenced there was some new data. Service leadership talked about it at a conference recently where they last quarter, roughly a third of all MSPs lost money. That's not good data, right? That's not what we want to be hearing. So I when you answer that question is, well, yeah, I think those at the top of the food chain, the best in class, are leaning into this because they have generally been really good at this. And one of the things that I love about working with MSPs and talking with them is the idea of operationalizing tech, right? They take a lot of time and they think about the way that they can do things on a repeated basis. You can think robotic process automation or automation in general, and how that gets applied in a customer's business. Well, this is just another example of the ones that are looking at this and being smart about it are saying, yep, we're going to lean into this and we're going to start doing that. There is still a long tail of providers that are still struggling to get out the basics. One of the things I like to think about is like, look, we get hit with a lot of hype and a lot of noise, and we have to be careful about dismissing the stuff that's garbage. Last year, there was a lot of noise about the metaverse, right? Yeah, that wasn't a thing. That wasn't a thing. Remember we were talking about big data? That was another one that, look, didn't really play out. But that's, as you dig into that, you could see the hype hit, but the data was never there. This is one of those cases where it's like, well, okay, the hype's hitting, and there's lots of examples of where it's hitting. And now we've got to be tracking this over time to see if those continue to play out. But from an adoption and a stickiness perspective, I think this one's real.
Carlos, sorry, I cut you off before.
I was just now in that moment, right? We're talking a minute ago before we launched about this article I read this week, which is we just titled simply "Remember Watson," right? and the hype around Watson, and we welcome our machine overlords, right? The famous quote from Jeopardy, and then Watson, Dave, I think you're mentioning, has just been sort of relaunched, right? Yet again. Mm-hmm. And I'm interested in the contrarian view of this as well, right? And it's not that what gets most suppressed, but I've read very solid pieces in the last month just saying, look, this is not right. It's a step along the way to the future, but we still haven't crossed that line that people think that we've crossed because of ChatGPT. When you look under the hood, what it's doing isn't really as amazing as it may seem or as it's presented to other people. I'm not an expert in AI, so I don't know whether we are or we not, right? I know that historically, a lot of times we think we've crossed the line, then it turns out that we really didn't. So
Well, right. We don't know till we look back.
Right.
What I will say is like, look, I'm not necessarily convinced this is like a completely magical transformational position. What I also will note is that the folks at OpenAI didn't think this was a thing, kind of released it a little bit on a whim, where we know from interviews, people like Google and Amazon have had tech like this and they didn't release it. But once it got released, it opened up a lot of creativity and a lot of new interesting things are happening. We won't know for sure what sticks, but early signs looking kind of interesting, right? And you can immediately get to some really creative use cases pretty quickly. We see these big headlines of things that are being tested out, but you can also see it in some of the pilot programs. I just covered some pilot about health systems that are now pairing generative AI with doctors to help with patient care. And they're seeing a much increased ability to track data, but they're also seeing improvements in bedside manner. So in the ability to help rough the edge, smooth the edges off some of the doctor's communications. So when we look at those pilots and we're seeing kind of the results that are coming out of it, it's surprisingly good.
Yeah, I have two other thoughts, Steph. I think I agree with you. I've said before, I think we have the wrong A in AI. I don't like artificial. I like augmented, right? And I think that these systems work best when they act as an augmentation. The way Google augmented, right, our ability to find things and to store information, right? Hopefully, AI augments your ability to create a story or to understand an event in the past. And I think that calling it augmented in terms is probably more accurate in thinking about what it's actually doing for people. And I think that's the interesting part. Is what I find interesting about ChatGPT is not the technology so much, but like you said, the demand. You wouldn't think that it was going to be a thing because we just didn't know how ready people were to interact with AI in some form, right? I think we have thought about this as a technology issue. To me, what I find fascinating about ChatGPT is that it has shown AI as a consumer product, right? There is consumer level demand from kids to adults of all ages who are ready mentally, psychologically, and have been trained maybe for the course of the last 2 decades with mobile devices to interact with machines in a way that we haven't seen before. And this is not the machine that's going to do that, but clearly the human race, the species, right, has made a step forward and is when the right one comes, if it isn't this one, right, we're sort of ready and are happy to go. Which I, as the writer or the humanities person on the show, right, I find that interesting that we've sort of evolved to the point where the idea is not so much threatening, but enjoyable, and we're waiting for the right thing to come along. And when it does, we'll be all over it.
Well, Carlos, nobody has ever accused the tech industry about being good at naming things. So I mean, and actually, there's a bit of a lesson there too, right? Is because we get a little bit too wrapped up in our own kind of marketing hype and names. And again, you said it just then. Like the reason that I think this is interesting is we're actually when we go look at what users do. If we're thinking about the community of people that are adopting this, we're seeing actual use cases. Now, yeah, I have tons of concerns about all kinds of, the land of bad generated AI that, flooding the internet with poor content. But I'm also seeing signs of where it can be used in interesting ways with pairing, as exactly as you described, pairing a human to do creative tasks faster, right? I've used it myself to actually accelerate my ability to create stuff. Do I just cut and paste what it generates? No, absolutely not. It's bad. But what it does is it allows me to move faster in terms of the generation. And that's where we're seeing those use cases happen. You point to the doctors, you can see it, taking over that the ability to do brainstorming. GeekWire just did a really interesting test where they compared putting a group of reporters into a room to generate the ideas, and then they also had generative AI do those ideas, and they found that actually the ideas coming out of generative AI were not particularly noteworthy, that there was a lot of subtlety and nuance to the stuff coming out of humans that was much more interesting. But they discovered that the actual interesting way to do it was to put the generative AI at the table with the writers to make the process go faster, because then they go, oh yeah, we could do that, and we could nuance it, and we could change it. And that process of acceleration is why I'm excited.
Yeah.
Interesting part is the question about acquisition, right? There, especially in the arts, there has long been a belief that it's not just the skill that you have that's valuable, but the years you spend acquiring it, right? The same thing in certain academic fields, that there's value in the process of learning to become a scholar. That's why you do a PhD program. So it isn't just what you learn, it's the time it takes you to learn it. And I find that question sort of now having to be redebated. It's interesting. If you can, with the help of an AI, attain a level of information or creativity, quote unquote, that it would normally take you years to get, then what is lost in that process, right? If the hypothesis was that the process of acquisition was itself valuable and that is lost now, do we lose something that we're not really thinking about at this moment?
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. And this, by the way, this is the space which I think is interesting for those that are delivering services and advising customers to work with their customers to explore and experiment with. I think the one thing you can't do is ignore it, but I think you're going to be in situations where you'll be running interesting tests. You'll be working with customers to figure out what it means, training their people, and we're all immersed in it. Customers aren't, and they look to their providers. One of the things people always ask me is do I think that this space will get replaced? And I look and I say, no, I don't, because the core value of what IT services, MSPs do at any scale is they help connect customers with technology solutions that help for their business. That core value doesn't go away. It changes, it evolves, it moves up the stack to more and more complicated things. We're not spending nearly as much time talking about, internet connectivity and you implementing email and all of those basic things we did 20 years ago. Now we're having these nuanced conversations about how can we help you use this technology? Oh, and by the way, be compliant and do it in a way that's, that's hitting all the regulatory concerns and that's ethical for your view of the world and achieves your business goals. And how can we train your people? And how can we make them effective? And how can we measure that effectiveness? And Carlos, to your point, how can we test? Are we making sure that we're helping people grow in the way that we need them to be effective in our business? And I love complicated problems, right? Like problems like this. Cha-ching! In mystery, there is margin.
Yeah, there's you bring up a great point, and the thing is, as they say, we've seen this movie before. I mean, there's 100 versions of enterprises saying, "Hey, I'm going to do this myself. I'm going to buy a bunch of software. I don't need any integration or technology companies to help me." I mean, I remember having a very heated debate at one of our events early on in the automation space, robotic process automation space, where this CIO of a very large bank was like, why should I pay a service provider to implement all this stuff when I can buy the software directly from the software company and save that margin? Well, guess what? It didn't work, right? He's got a bunch of software licenses sitting on his shelf right now, and had to bring that stuff in anyway, but it cost him 3 years. I think the same thing is going to happen here. And the compliance is an interesting one you mentioned, Dave, but also just all the concerns about ChatGPT. This is all based on, consumer grade, if you will, publicly available information. But what if you marry the structure, the framework, the things that the MSPs and the IT providers are good at, which is doing things in a compliant way, managing data in a structured way. You take ChatGPT and you put it within the confines of an enterprise, and you say, here are the rules, here are the restrictions, but now go at it, and the organization can have some control over what's output. Now all of a sudden, that's a pretty big reason to hire a tech company.
Right, exactly. And exactly. This is where you keep taking the highlighter and going, right here, everybody, right here. This is where your head's at. This is the area that will help your customers. And by the way, everyone's going to be looking for the magic answer. The fact that it doesn't have a magic answer is why it's a good business space, because there's an element of bespoke to everything that we're delivering here. Isn't that great? That's what makes it high value.
Dan, there's one other thought here too, and that is, we've talked about this before. When I worked at Accenture, I was involved when we first started doing analytics as a service, right? And things like forecasting product demand. And there was a big debate in Accenture because there are people who thought, A, that we couldn't do it. I mean, it was just technically not possible, right? Or that we shouldn't be doing it. And one of the points that I was making at the time was that, you're getting outsourced, right? Can often have nothing to do with how good you are at your job. What happens is the value that job can create goes up at someplace else. And I was making this point about people who do forecasting. It was long ago, right? Not such a great job at a company, didn't have a career progression. So let's say you could make 80K as a forecaster. Suddenly, Accenture starts doing forecasting as service, and you're worth twice as much because we can forecast for 5 clients and you can teach other people to forecast. The value of the job just got way higher in another firm than it did in the place where it was being executed before. So technology made that possible for us. I'm really interested to see what jobs, if generative AI is really here, right? What things outsourcing companies will invent and will discover that suddenly that job is worth way more at an Accenture or IBM or Infosys than it is in the kind of home place where it was created.
Right. And that scales down too, by the way, because and you're exactly right on the thinking. And we should be watching. Those of us that play in the 87% of service providers that do less than $10 million in revenue should look at that and say, yeah, and you can figure out your own versions of that work with, SMB and mid-market customers and deliver those same solutions to those same customers because they have the same needs, just at different scales.
If you think about this writer's strike, right, which is looking like a kind of tough nut to crack, I wonder whether somewhere there isn't a fear that there's a startup somewhere that says, why are you paying writers to write your shows?
They're nuts. They're nuts to strike right now.
Boxes that can write an entire series worth of shows. Give me a pilot. We train it on the pilot, and then for a fraction of what it costs you to do it, here's an entire series created by AI. So I do think that it's the exciting part is saying, if this technology is revolutionary, there's a lot of things that can be quote unquote outsourced that will be able to be outsourced in the future that we don't think of it today, because that's typically what happens, right? every 10 years or so, we have a list of jobs that we think this can never be outsourced. And then suddenly it can.
I think if you're a writer right now, you should do what the finance guys did back in 2008 and hide and be happy if you still have a job and pretend that hope that nobody realizes you're still on the payroll, right?
I don't know, Dan. We'll have to see because I mean you cannot unsee Will Smith eating spaghetti if you've ever looked at that video online. You can't unsee it, and it's horrific, right? So I think that generative AI is still not great at modeling people. I don't need 6 or 4 fingers on my humans. There's a lot of stuff here where I think that there is space for this. I think that having those debates early is actually a good thing. You guys highlighted Spotify taking down a bunch of AI songs. In a way, good. Have you listened to a bunch of it? It's really bad. It's one of the business reasons to take down all of that stuff out of Spotify is not necessarily over the fact that, they're worried about all the complexities of copyright. It's that they're in the business of delivering good entertainment to customers. And a lot of the music isn't good. And so for as much as we talk about automation in those creative spaces, there is a real need for that human touch. I still believe, I'm going to keep saying it, I think it's accelerant, right? I think we want to talk about coupling those creatives with the right tools to do a great job rather than worrying about it all replacing everything.
Yeah, the other one is consulting, right? There was an article, and Dana just made this comment. The article the other day was is ChatGPT the new McKinsey? Right.
Right.
So the idea of, often there were consulting jobs that were hired because you just wanted to have a small team of really smart people look at a question, or investigate an option. If suddenly that can be done through machines, and I know this has been talked about again. I think my whole career in consulting, we were always talking about when are the machines kind of put us out of work. It doesn't happen, but
Right.
what will this enable becomes an interesting question on the consulting side as well.
I think it's going to move as faster. And by the way, the other thing we're kind of glossing over is how much more data there is to ingest, right? The fact that we have such an explosion of data, we need tools that help us be better at refining all of the incredible amounts of data that are out there. So you look at, say, the kinds of jobs we were trying to force into timeframes are just not possible based on the volume of data happening now. So, I look at that and say, there is still a lot of space for humans. They're going to be doing a lot of different and interesting things, but I'm not sitting here worried about being replaced.
I don't know. I hear all that, but when I see those stats, and you alluded to it, Dave, before, where 45% of respondents with an AI doctor felt that it was empathetic, compared to, I think it was 4% of actual doctors seemed empathetic to them. You start wondering. I mean, early on, that was that MSP example I gave before about the chatbot. That was the concern. The concern was that a chatbot or any piece of technology is not going to give my customer the white glove level service that I want them to have. But if those numbers are true, if people actually prefer to order from an AI engine at Wendy's than from a human being, then I don't think it's this dystopian, there's no jobs left thing either. But if you have 3 pilots on a plane and you don't want to get on that plane without a human, okay, but then it's one human, right? You don't need 3 for a transatlantic flight.
Maybe, right? But again, there is a big difference between 0 and 1 in these cases. And do you want to get on an automated plane to fly to your automated surgery? I'm not sure a lot of people are actually going to sign up for that. Now, will that change? Maybe we'll move those people into the ability to do customer service better. By the way, last time I checked, nobody's enjoying flying, right? No. So perhaps you can work on changing the product around and make it a better experience for everyone by being able to perhaps have the one pilot and now more teams of customer service people. I think we want to think about it in those terms. How do we make the experience better for people versus worrying about it all wiping out all the humans? I think that's where the space and the opportunity is.
I agree with you. Last question for me, and then Carlos has maybe a final thought. I think back to so you see all this opportunity, and then you see all the companies, the governments saying, "Hold on, slow down. This isn't compliant. This isn't secure." But meanwhile, the benefits are so exponential, and I think back to AWS and other technologies where, it created this shadow IT thing where people started doing things on their own because the compliance and the procurement and the regulation people just made it too difficult. What's happening in the companies you're talking to? Are they kind of going rogue? Because to me, this is shadow IT on steroids.
Well, it is shadow IT on steroids, right? But I, for one, I'm going to raise my hand and say I welcome regulators here, because you know what we didn't do is we didn't look closely enough at social media, and we have a generation of young women who are struggling with mental health issues over social media. I'm much more concerned about that than worrying about like, am I slightly stifling innovation here? Yeah. Let's worry about raising a generation of people with good mental health that aren't struggling because we didn't take a moment to let the regulators do their part. I want there to be healthy collision of the two, right? I think that's an important part of the process, is to have the regulators butt heads with those that are doing interesting work. But we've got to remember that we are also talking about outcomes, as Carlos alluded to, that we don't always know what the outcomes are. And I want to ask those hard questions. I'm actually encouraged by the fact that this time around, it appears that regulators are thinking about this kind of stuff and are applying rules smartly. The EU has moved very quickly on putting together some frameworks. The White House has done as well in terms of putting together their framework. And the FTC is looking at this and saying we're going to impose the rules of the road. I'm encouraged by all of that. And I say I want that healthy conflict. I don't think it's a good idea to leave it alone without the discussion.
You know, Dan, my final thought is a book I read a couple of years ago called "Only Humans Need Apply." Right, it sort of was sort of a kind of meditation on the future of work post AI, and the net was 3 jobs in the future. Fantastic job making the machine. Not so fantastic job keeping the machine running. Right. Last thing left is whatever the machine can or won't do. If you're not designing machines or maintaining them, get very good at something machines can or won't do. And in a nutshell, I think that's the future, and it worries me a bit, right? Because the technological advance in the last century, right? The history of the how it's hurt and reshifted labor, right? They're always winners and losers in these evolutions. And I don't necessarily think that ChatGPT is the thing. I do think it is a thing. I think you're absolutely right, Dave. And I think that because my 15-year-old, who's very tech savvy, is the only thing ever came to me and said, "Can you show me how to use ChatGPT?"
Yep. And I'll tell you that we've talked in terms of jobs. And my final thought here is I actually think that we need to reframe the question when we talk about this. We're not in the business of, we shouldn't be in the business of protecting jobs. We should be in the business of protecting people. And they are different statements. Businesses aren't responsible for making sure that the jobs that they put forth are perfect for every single one. But we as society should think about the way that we want to protect people and invest in training and development and learning to build out a workforce that is incredibly competitive and makes us, plentiful and be able to take advantage of all these pieces. But we want to reframe it to think about protecting people versus protecting jobs.
Well said.
I love it. Dave, thanks so much for joining us.
Oh, thanks for having me, guys. This has been great fun.
We'll see you next time. Carlos, really interesting conversation, and good to have somebody on with that level of energy that can keep the conversation going, right?
Have Dave back on again soon. Hopefully.
Dave's a pro and runs a couple shows. Check out MSP Radio and the Business of Tech, which I love that title because it's so much of what I think needs to be talked about. More and more the business side of technology. Carlos, before we go, just one more chance to plug. We're offering a masterclass with you.
That's right. So we're offering a small group class to go deep into the rules of persuasion. So the book comes out August 3rd, but this is a chance to understand the concepts, the research, all the ideas behind the book, and also to learn how to apply those in your personal and professional life. So if you're interested in a really, I think it's first of its kind, deep dive into the chemistry of how human persuasion works in communications and all form of communication, then certainly this is a great place to take that deep dive in.
And for all the people watching who are true techies and have the old if I build it they will come mentality, this book, this masterclass is for you. It's not just for marketing people and PR people and communications people, although those are great candidates for this. Anybody who has to communicate a business idea, a product idea, really anything in business at all. Really interesting. So, and what's great about this, Carlos, is you'll be actively involved in, teaching and interacting in this. Yes.
Right. I will be teaching. There'll be 5 group sessions, and then everyone takes the class. We'll get an additional individualized coaching session where we'll go deep into making sure that they can apply what's been done in the group sessions, right, in their professional setting. And one of the people I've coached is a chief digital officer, and we talked. The entire conversation was about convincing or persuading his organization that digital transformation is necessary, right, and required for the future. So I don't think there's a profession that doesn't rely at some point, right, in some cases, most of the time, on being able to get other people to understand and agree with your viewpoints. social
Well, I'll be there. It starts next month. Go ahead and sign up, network.irpaai.com. Check the professional services section. And in the meantime, Carlos, we'll be back on Wednesday at noon. Yes?
Yeah, see you next week, Dan. See you then.
Have a great week, everybody.
All right. Bye-bye.